We kind of discussed some ideas on how people write stories. And a lot of the kids said, well, you know, I'm not really sure how people write. I just know that they write, and I get the book, or I get whatever the information is, and I read it. And I told them to start thinking about writing as a process, that there's not just one way to write, that you have to go through many steps before completing a final piece. And I said that authors, whether they've been writing for 10 years, whether they've been writing for a year or 20 years, they all go through this process. And we went through the 5 steps of the writing process, which include pre-writing, the writing or the drafting period, the revising period, the editing period, and then the publishing period. And I told them ahead of time that we would be going through all of these periods within the group time. And I also informed them that it was okay that some of them would be at different levels on different days, and some of them might finish in a week, others might finish in 3 weeks, but we were going to work together till they got to the end point, the publishing point. I handed them out a packet, and I'm going to hand you your packets right now so you can see the information. If you could just take and pass these. I handed them a wordless book, which is The Mitten by Jan Brett. But I handed them basically just the picture book version of the book with no words in it. So the children were asked to kind of get an example, look at the book, get an idea of what the book was about before we did anything. They really had to look at the characters, they had to look at the pictures, and they had to get a feeling of what they thought the book would be about. Then traditionally, you color after you're finished writing, when you're almost ready for that publishing piece, but I flipped it around and I told them that I wanted them to color in each picture before they even wrote the story. This way they could develop characters, they can develop ideas before they were ready to write. I reminded them that in stories, if you see a character or an object, they generally don't change from page to page. So I reminded them to, while they were coloring, to try to be mindful of that and to keep things the same color as they went from page to page. So for example, when you see the bear later on in the story, when you look at their completed projects, you'll see that the bear should be the same color every time you see the bear, or the mitten should be the same color on each page, unless that's something they were writing into their story with the details. So I just kept reminding them to be very mindful of the characters. If you look carefully, you'll see 3 examples that I chose. And the reason why I chose these examples as we go through the process is because one is a sample of a student who was a lower level writer. Another one is an example of a student who was very neat, and she really worked through the pictures the way, she was a beautiful writer. And the last one shows somebody who added tremendous detail in their writing. And it was very fortunate for me to see these children during this year, because last year, as the 1st grade teacher, many of them were in my class, and I really got to see them grow through this process. Also, in the packet of information, there is an example of the pre-writing that one child had done. This was prior to editing. They just wrote out their ideas, and I kind of gave them guidelines on how to record their information so that it would be easy to transfer onto the main project. They wrote in their notebooks, they wrote down the page numbers, and they wrote down what information they wanted to record onto that page. Afterwards, we met in a conference, and we talked about editing strategies. At this point, revising strategies. At this point, I gave the students some things to think about and some things to change, and then they had to in turn tell me some things that they would like to change. Then they would go back to their area, onto their carpet square, and they would work trying to edit and to add more information in. Once we got to the actual editing piece, where we looked at spelling and grammar errors and punctuation errors, the students were, again, conferenced with me, and we went over how to edit and how to find spellings and all sorts of things in punctuation. After my first peer review, it was commented that I should go over with the students how to edit on their own. So after the first peer model, we went back and we talked about peer editing and how to make editing marks and how to work together to edit prior to meeting with the teacher. And they really enjoyed that process after the fact. And really, the biggest thing that I kept reminding them was that this was a real story, and that later on I would share with them the original Jan Brett version of the story. So once all the children were finished and once all the conferences had been made and everybody was ready to share, we had a publishing party. And at the publishing party, each child got to sit in the author's chair, they got to read their story, and they got to accept comments from their peers, from their classmate, which is very similar to what we're doing now. They just flourished. They enjoyed reading their stories so much. They enjoyed hearing the comments. They enjoyed saying the comments. And if you see in the pictures, you'll see children reading, children raising their hands to respond. They absolutely loved this concept. After everybody had finished, we got back into a circle format, and I read them the original version of Jan Brett's The Mitten. It's a wonderful book filled with lots of details. The illustrations are phenomenal, and the children were very excited to see how she wrote and how her illustrations were compared to how theirs were. And as we were reading the story, the kids were pointing out, oh, that character is different than my character, or I like the way that she did this, but I did it differently. And they really were able to take ownership of their writing and compare it to somebody who's been writing for years, who does this for a living. And they truly loved it. After we finished the whole story, we compared and contrast on a chart. We made a Venn diagram about the differences and similarities between Jan Brett's version and each individual student's version. And it was just, for me, it was an amazing experience just to see these children truly thinking about what they've done and about what it means to be a writer and how they can move along in the writing process now as writers.
Great. You've ceded a minute to us. That's terrific.
Great, thank you.
The reviewers now have 10 minutes, or actually 11 minutes if we need it, to read through carefully, particularly paying attention to the criteria for the review. So our 10 minutes are up, and it's time now to respond to this work, Kim's work and her students' work. And again, I would ask the reviewers to be distinct. You don't have to announce that you're giving a warm comment or a cool comment. You can just give it, but try to keep